welcome to Cinemaholics. You're listening to our review of The White Tiger, which is an excerpt from episode 204 of the Cinemaholics podcast, hosted by Will Ashton and myself, John Negroni. To watch and listen to Cinemaholics every week live, follow us on YouTube. The link is in the description of this review. Enjoy the show. Let's move on to our next film of the week, and that is a new Netflix film. So this one's full Netflix, not just internationally. It is The White Tiger, which is also based on a novel. A lot of novel adaptations and article adaptations this week. But this one is based on Arvind Adiga's 2008 novel, which is also called The White Tiger. This was directed by Ramin Bahrani. It stars Adarsh Gourav. I'm sure I'm butchering those pronunciations. I apologize. Along with him, he stars with Rajkummar Rao and Priyanka Chopra. I think she's definitely the biggest name stateside compared to some of these actors, because we've seen her in a lot of things. I think probably her big thing would be Quantico, I suppose. Was she in Quantico? Is that the right person I'm thinking of? I hope I don't have that wrong.
I mean, I haven't watched Quantico, but I'm pretty sure that's a show she's famous for.
I've never seen it either. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's the one. And she's like married to Nick Jonas and all that. But
I didn't want to specify that because I feel like that'd be kind of dismissive to associate with her husband. But yeah.
Oh, well, I'm just referring to how people would know her and everything. It's not, it's not all there is to her, of course. But anyway, that said, this film is interesting. It's kind of like, it starts off as like kind of a dark sort of narrative, or not dark, sorry. It kind of starts off as like sort of a light rags to riches story, and then it like gets darker as it goes. It is about a young servant who is writing to I think the Chinese prime minister, who is going to come visit in India, and he proceeds to write a letter, and that's the voiceover narration for this entire movie of him explaining where he comes from and how he got to where he is today, and some of the circumstances that led him to not being able to get an education, even though he was extremely intelligent for his age, and how he falls under the thumb of the upper caste, or the high caste, I forget what it was called in this film, and some of the dark criminal elements he falls into because of that. It's a pretty long film. It's a little over 2 hours, and I was definitely feeling it by the time we were getting close to the end. I was like, wow, I mean, this is, it's not that it's not entertaining, but I definitely felt like there's a lot happening here. It
has some pretty big pacing issues just in terms of like the narrative itself, but
there's a lot they could have cut out.
It's not even that they cut out. I just think they kind of focus on some things that we'll get to more in a bit. I mean, I'll let you speak your thoughts before I get into that.
Sure.
Yeah.
There is a lot the film does to try to like really show the like slavish devotion or performative devotion that this guy has to his masters, and like how he's willing to go to any length. He's a driver for them throughout the film, and how, the lengths he will go to please them, despite like he clearly has like a predilection toward the great socialist in India. I forgot to mention, by the way, that this takes place in like the late 2000s. I mean, it is based on a novel from 2008. And I think what doesn't work about the movie is the progression of this guy. I do not really buy what happens with his character throughout, even though I buy the idea of it, like the idea of it and like what he's fighting against, or what he's rebelling against, I should say. It all makes sense. I just think like related to the pacing issues, events following each other, I thought were really disconnected and lacking of motivation that not even the narration could really tie up. That said, I still enjoyed this. I think this is a really decent watch, and as far as Netflix movies go, it's definitely a bit better than most of the ones you'll find that you haven't heard of that happens to be on trending.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm slightly higher in this because I think it's on the verge of being good. I just think the narrative just gets kind of tripped up by the end to the point where it doesn't really meet its full potential. And I think part of that is because it has an issue that becomes of a lot of adaptations, which is it's a lot of telling and not a lot of showing sometimes.
Exactly.
Where it's like the lead character is like just dictating his letter, which I'm assuming is from the book. It's just like kind of like saying a lot of stuff, but it's not often showing it. Sometimes they do. Like there's some kind of interesting like dream or fantasy sequences, but they come about so sporadically, and they kind of like come in and out of the narrative that they're kind of confusing at times, because like there'll be long stretches of films where there aren't fantasy sequences, and then like there'll be like 3 right back to back, and it's just like, okay, it's an odd choice. And it comes down to, I think, what's sort of the main issue here is, which is that the movie, for I want to say like at least like 2/3 of it, is trying to be one thing. and then by like the last like 20 or 30 minutes, it becomes a totally different movie.
Yeah, it's worse.
Which is fine. Like I think the direction it takes at the end is interesting, but it's just like this is a completely different movie. Like if you wanted to make that movie, make that movie. Like you're kind of beholden to making this other movie throughout, which is not bad, but it's like just pick one or the other, because at this point you can't be this movie because we're almost done. Like we're just wrapping up. Like you know the lights are coming off at this point. So I don't know if that's because like I think this is you might have mentioned this already, but I believe the author of this also wrote Slumdog Millionaire.
Well, I was gonna mention that they dig at that movie, you know,
Right.
like they make fun of it in like one of the lines of dialogue, and I was kind of taken aback. I was like, wow, talk about self-deprecation.
Right. Which I think is interesting. Like I like a movie that's like willing to acknowledge the flaws of
Right.
Slumdog Millionaire, which I like Slumdog Millionaire. I think it's a fine film, but like I think there's room, you know, there's room for criticism there, and if you want to make a movie like that, by all means, but
It just sounds like the author was like on film Twitter for a day,
Right.
and then, you know.
Yeah, it does kind of have a Twitter thread feel at times. But yeah, I mean, it just kind of feels like it's following the kind of progression of the Slumdog Millionaire plot at times. Like it's almost kind of beholden to that in this weird way where it's like criticizing it, but also trying to like kind of follow a similar narrative format. Even having like a flashback at the beginning of the film, which is odd. But I don't know.
Yeah.
I just think it's like it's not that it's bad. I think it's just sort of maybe indecisive. Like I think it's trying to be a bunch of different things at once, and the movie just doesn't fully settle on what it's doing. But I think what it is doing at any given time is pretty good and pretty interesting. That I'm not willing to dismiss that. I just think it could have been better.
I agree that it's indecisive. I guess I didn't perceive it as indecisive in terms of the story all the time, because I thought it did have a pretty clear message. I thought what was more decisive to me was the character. I just think what his motivations and what drives him to do certain actions, it felt random, or it felt like certain, like I was saying before, like certain events don't lead gracefully to other events. And because, like you've mentioned, it doesn't really show us through his performance. And I'm not trying to knock down the performance itself. I don't think it's bad or anything.
Yeah, no, I like the performance.
I
thought they did a very good job.
I think he's just let down a little bit by the writing, and like he's not given the chance to really like, you know, blossom, you know, his emotion, and like what is what is actually informing his actions. I think is something that needs to be balanced a bit better in order for it to come through for people, so that when they watch this, they get it and they're able to like this guy and understand his plight. And I think that that's going to be hard for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think it's like they don't trust the performance. Maybe that's what's going on, because it feels like so much is over communicated to the point where, like you said, it doesn't fully naturally progress. It just kind of gets to this point where like out of nowhere, it's just like, oh, and here's a bunch of things like blah, 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 blah. And it just kind of comes out of nowhere. I was like, I wish you developed that more throughout the narrative, because I think that's an interesting progression. I really like the duality of that performance, like we see in these flashback sequences, as opposed to like his uprising. But then, like you said, like I was watching the film and it's like we're getting to like the last like 30 minutes. I'm like, okay, it's like we're still kind of on this point. Like, why are we like not really getting to this? And it just speeds through that in a way that I found dissatisfying, because I was really interested to learn more about that uprise and like kind of like that progression, even though it was kind of mimicking Scarface at times. Like I still would have liked to have seen more of that change of fate in a way that felt a little bit more natural, like you're saying, or a little bit more even handled. But by the end, I just found that it felt like a lot of good ideas, like a very interesting concept. I would be curious to read the book because of that, but I just don't think the narrative quite sticks the landing enough to make it a full out good film, but still interesting nonetheless.
Yeah, I have to agree. And if it sounds like we're coming down pretty hard on it, I think it's because, based on, you know, what we've been talking about, I think it really just comes down to the fact that you and I, it's like you said, it has so much potential. Like it could have been so much better, and it gets a lot of things right. So it's all the more frustrating that by the end, I just did not feel like I got out of it what it was really putting in itself. And that's just a shame. So yeah, I'm just kind of like a B- on it, kind of verging on a C+, but I do give it the B- because there's plenty to like. And I think that, yeah, if you can overlook some of the shortcomings, I'm sure that it'll be a decent experience for a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, I'm also B minus, but I'm verging on a B. Like, I think there's a lot to appreciate here, and I do like the style of it. I just think if it was a little bit more decisive and figured out what type of movie it was making from the onset and just stuck to that a little bit more cohesively, I think it would have been a very strong, maybe even a really good film. But as it is, it just kind of feels like a bunch of different things at once. But I do agree that thematically, or at least like in terms of its social and political commentary, I do think it hits a lot of those points with a lot of precision and a lot of pinpoint accuracy. And those are some of the best moments of the film for sure. But yeah, I just feel like inside of that is just like kind of muddled and kind of confused film nevertheless. So, oh well.
Agreed.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that is The White Tiger. It is available to stream right now on Netflix. Thank you so much for listening to our show. Be sure to subscribe to Cinemaholics on your favorite podcast app of choice. Mine is Overcast. Or find us on YouTube, where you can stream our weekly episodes live for even more banter and weird film takes. See you all next time.